Hey, well, good evening, everybody. Are you ready for me to start?
Yes.
Yes, okay, right. Thank you. My name is David Gray. I am the principal of Brummana High School in Lebanon, which this year is celebrating its 150th anniversary, which is actually quite important in what I'm going to say because it's a symbol of its longevity and its resilience in the face of all kinds of untold horrors over the years, including the current situation which is taking place in our neighboring country of Israel and Gaza, and indeed across the southern Lebanese border. Now, you very kindly invited me to speak this evening, um, and the title is Education Under Siege, question mark, in Brummana, Lebanon. And I chose that title because I thought, being someone from the West myself and having lived through from a distance many wars in different parts of the world, that people in the West imagine that something like education would be under siege in the West Bank, where Ramallah School is, in Lebanon, because it's a neighboring country. Because the way in which news is broadcast is such to assume, or for the viewers to assume, that whatever horrors they see apply everywhere in the region all the time. And of course, that simply is not the case. So, and even, heaven forbid, if something terrible did happen here, life goes on. Education goes on. It has to. Time doesn't stop. So children don't stop growing up, and going to school for them and for their parents represents normality and the hope for a better future. It's a kind of continuity. So, what is it like to educate children in desperate need of learning under the shadow of war in the background? Well, I'll try and talk both practically and philosophically in answering that question. From a practical point of view, when the events of October the 7th led on to retaliation and reaction in Gaza, and indeed in southern Lebanon, and it seemed likely, or at least distinctly possible, that perhaps Lebanon would be engulfed in this war, and may still be, although I pray that it won't be. We met, my senior leadership team and I met and discussed very practical things. We didn't for a moment think that school would stop, but we did think a little bit about what would happen if, for example, Beirut was bombarded in the middle of a school day. And we set about creating a plan as to what we would do with the children. We would stop school. We would send them home in their buses to areas which were safe. We would invite parents to come and collect their children, obviously at an earlier time than usual. We would contact parents now, which in fact we have done, whose children are normally dropped off at an education centre or with their grandparents or some other place, and tell them that we would not be doing that if there was an emergency, and that we would only drop them off at their own house or invite the parents to come and get them. And we talked about what we would do for parents who couldn't come and get their children and for whom there was no bus to a safe area. And we, in fact, decided that we would keep them at school and until their parents could come, and if necessary, keep them overnight or for several nights in our boarding houses. And indeed, we have even bought extra bed linen for such an eventuality. And we have recorded all this, and the document is in the hands of those people who will need to send out messages through the parent app that we have on the day, assuming, of course, that we can use the parent app. Otherwise, we might have to use telephones and so on. And we have trained our secretarial staff in what they would have to do. We have also instructed each other as to what we shall do if this eventuality happens. We've also talked about what would happen if, again, heaven forbid, the school was hit, which I have to say is extremely unlikely, but nevertheless, when you're living in a situation such as we're living in here, you have to think about all the eventualities just in case they happen. And there is actually one safe-ish place in the school where we could take everybody, which is underneath our theatre, where we have a sports hall which is partly underground and could house probably the entire school population properly organised. And I then wrote a letter to the parents, and a detailed letter as to what would happen in an emergency, what we would expect them to do, what we would do. And of course, we prayed that none of this would happen. So from a purely practical point of view, these are some of the things that, that we thought about and that we planned for. Then, of course, we talked about what would happen once the children were at home. And we said, well, of course, we'll go online, which we've done before during the pandemic, and we'll teach from home. And we've even gone to the lengths of finding out which staff couldn't teach from home and who would come into school to present their lessons online. We have a total of 7 staff who would do that. We know where we would put them. The rest of the staff have been thoroughly briefed about how they would teach online, and we've made sure that they've got suitable equipment and access, etc., even down to what they would teach online and what hours we would follow. This, of course, is always assuming that there would be internet connection, which there might well not be. And then we would be into a situation where we'd be having to send work home, etc. But what you'll notice about all this, I mean, and it's easy to be calm, cool and collected when nothing's happening, is that we haven't envisaged the school not operating. We have continued with the view that whatever else happens, even if it had to close for a short time, we would carry on. If I go on from there a little bit, what actually happened at school was that once this crisis emerged, we had families taking their children away. We have 1,284 children aged between 3 and 18 at Brummana High School, and 31 families took their children away, they told us, and they went abroad. They went to the Gulf, some of them went to Europe, some even went to the USA. You'll be interested to know that just about a month later, 28 of those families have come back. They panicked. Understandably, I don't blame them at all. They have little children. They want to be somewhere safe. They thought that Armageddon had arrived, and so they did that. But in fact, they have come back. And if I move on now to actually what happened psychologically, there was definitely a sense of incipient panic, I think, amongst our parent body, and indeed amongst all the people that I met. And I feel that this was partly fueled by the behaviour of foreign embassies, including my own country, the UK, who put me under considerable pressure to leave the country as soon as possible. And indeed, that's what the embassies did. They said, get out while there's a window of opportunity. We can't guarantee your safety. And of course, there is only one airport in Lebanon. And if by any chance the Israelis bombed that, then there would be no way out except perhaps a boat to Cyprus. And I had parents visiting me British, European, American parents visiting me saying, should we go? Should we stay? Because they were very frightened. Now, I can understand that from their perspective. But what I think was unfortunate was that what the embassies were telling the citizens of their countries I can only describe it as a panic, spread amongst the Lebanese population, who naturally thought, well, if this is what the embassies are saying to the foreigners, they must know something we don't know. The war is going to engulf Lebanon now, soon. And that created enormous anxiety. And I felt it created a sense of helplessness amongst the Lebanese people I spoke to and met, because many of those couldn't get out. They were left behind, so to speak, to face the music. And that's hard. Having said that, I also found, and this was a great surprise to me, and I know how resilient the Lebanese are, but I found the Lebanese people here remarkably philosophical and calm about the situation. And that included my own teaching staff, who would say to me, oh, it's fine, we've faced this kind of situation before. We'll just stock up with food in the house and we'll get through it. And in fact, one person I met when I was out for a run, whom I know quite well, stopped me and said, how are things? And we chatted for a minute or two. And he said, have you been through a war in Lebanon before? I said, no, not at all. And he said, don't worry about it, it's fine. And I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. It was quite remarkable. And I have a great admiration for the way in which people here are able to adapt to, frankly, potentially terrifying circumstances. But then they've seen it all before. It's not new for them. And yet at the same time, paradoxically, they're worried, they're anxious, they're concerned about security. There's a sense of uncertainty. There's been a great movement of people in Lebanon, into Lebanon as well, away from the south of Lebanon, the dangerous areas up to Beirut and into the Mediterranean region. There's been a huge influx of Syrians as well in the last couple of months. And this is an unsettling effect on people. And it has meant that future plans are put on hold. Now, you may wonder where all this is leading to, but the fact is that school goes on. And now it's ever more important to learn about and practice the school values that we kind of take for granted, and to honour the words individuality, freedom, equality, respect, tolerance, peaceful resolution, Quakerly values that are part of our foundation and that we talk about every day in some respect to the children. And now they carry, in a sense, a greater weight because life is threatened and more fragile than ever. And then similarly, other aspects of school life suddenly become more important as well. Community service, which in the upper school, 160 hours are required to graduate from the school, where our students help the poor, the people in the community. They give service to others. The school motto is, I serve, in all kinds of ways. And of course, that comes to the forefront of our thoughts when we are aware of what is going on in a neighbouring country. Similarly, the emphasis on hard work to achieve and make the most of your education and to get to university becomes more important, because the fact that these children actually have the privilege of education is suddenly thrown into perspective when we see what's happening next door where it isn't, and also in the knowledge that perhaps it could be taken away from them. Similarly, practicing stewardship of our planet and of our surroundings is thrown into relief. Our school campus is very beautiful. It's on the side of Mount Lebanon. It's a botanical garden, a natural botanical garden, now an officially one, and it's much admired in the area for its natural qualities. And so the botanical garden has taken on a new importance too. This is God's natural world. We need to look after our environment. And indeed, we've just opened 2 outdoor spaces in the campus for study by young children. And this has been greeted with a sense of jubilation. One of them is a mathematical garden with all kinds of fascinating shapes and measurements and so on within it. And I think that's exciting. And it's exciting because the children and the staff realize that all of this is threatened, and therefore it becomes more fragile, more precious, more prominent. And it's more obvious in a crisis like this why education matters. It's a civilizing force. It's a force that liberates. It's a force that provides opportunity. And for parents to see their children going to school, to attend parents' evenings, to share with us a common interest in their children's future, becomes in worrying times a distraction for them, a meaningful focus, and normality. It happens every day. They take their children to school, they drop them off, they pick them up in the afternoon, they come in, they see the teachers, they see their children coming home in the afternoons, their faces beaming, the excitement of what's happened during the day, and it's normal life. And that's important. And it drives worries about Lebanon possibly being engulfed in a war to the back of their minds. Things like sports fixtures, which have happened just recently in the last couple of weeks in great numbers, demonstrate teamwork, camaraderie, peaceful pastimes, working together, and provide a form of reassurance, how we sort out our differences without going to war. So school is continuity. Its qualities in these kind of circumstances are ever more important in providing normality, in providing opportunities for children for the future. I saw this happen before when the economic collapse happened here, that there was a sense that all that was left was health and education. Health to keep you alive now, and education to keep you alive in the future. It's the hope of the future that is provided by schools, stimulating intellectual curiosity amongst children, showing them the chances they have, encouraging them to do well, to use their minds, to have ideas, because they are our future. I mean, now they need us, but tomorrow we shall need them. And so what I've seen really is that school, in circumstances like this, is actually no different from any other circumstances at all. It's the same every day. We do the same things. We have the same frustrations, excitement, achievement, failure. It's a microcosm of society. But the only difference is that it's taking place with a backdrop of danger and of potential disaster. But actually, when you come into the school, it's a haven of sanity and calm and continuity. And those features are very, very important in the current circumstances. It's a kind of form of reassurance, I suppose, really, to us all. I'm sure someone will ask me, since I haven't lived through quite the situation before, well, I've been here in Lebanon for 5 years, if I've been frightened. And the answer to that is only when people have attempted to make me frightened, like the embassies, or people talking in a frenetic manner about what could happen. And it reminds me of what Roosevelt said in the Second World War. There is nothing to fear but fear itself, because fear is a very dangerous emotion and leads people to do irrational things. But actually, being here at the school with over 1,000 children and with colleagues who are calm and purposeful and simply want to educate the children and lead normal lives, I haven't felt afraid at all. And I have at no point thought about leaving the country, and nor shall I. Whatever happens, there is important work to be done now, and schools are never more important than when the very fabric of society is threatened. Brummana High School, as I said, is 150 years old this year. It's survived a lot. Its longevity for not just me and my colleagues, but for parents and all scholars of the school, is reassurance that life carries on. And it's reason for us never to give up, but to cherish what we have and to nurture the young people in our care, who will grow up whatever happens and who will have the responsibility of maybe resolving some of the issues that are newspaper headlines today. The 27th of November last week was our 150th anniversary of the foundation of the school by Theophilus Waldemar, a Swiss, encouraged by American Quakers. And one of the things we did at the Founders' Day Assembly was we invited some old scholars of the school along to talk about their memories of Brummana High School. And one lady, 92 years old, recalled the Civil War and pointed out that Brummana had had 15 bombs land on it in the course of the Civil War, and that everybody had survived, and that she was thankful for that. And she expressed her undying affection and love of the school for providing her with protection and reassurance and a good education. And I thought it was lovely that she said that. So the other question that I asked myself is, what do young people think about when turmoil surrounds them, such as now? And actually, there are a lot of answers to this question, some of which are more obvious than others. The first thing to say is, well, yes, they are aware of what's going on, but it doesn't touch them as it does us. They're youngsters. They're excited about living, about the everyday things that they're discovering in their own lives and at school. The whole business of the threat of war is rather remote, although you may have seen something on YouTube the other week where one of our 5-year-old children was in the Dobbing Hall, which is an assembly hall at Brummana High School. And he said that he loved his country and he hated war and he didn't want it to come to Lebanon. It was very sweet the way he said it, but it just shows you that even a child that age is aware of what's going on. But on the whole, the children just want to get on with their lives. For some of the older ones, who are perhaps nearing the end of their school careers, it makes them cynical about the adult world and disillusioned with it. Some, it makes them want to leave as soon as possible, that is, to study abroad. And for some, it's another distraction to avoid working, an excuse not to work hard at school. But for the vast majority, it is business as usual. And it gives them a sense of urgency that their education is important and they should value it and they should appreciate it. And it's precious and special. And they'll tell you that. And that's the way we try to keep it. If we were in any way to compromise the education, close the school for a while, do other things that were really the reactions to fear, we would be succumbing to the destruction that has been brought about around us. And that we must not do. The best way to honour the dead, in my opinion, is by living well and by cherishing what we have. If we were to do otherwise and waste our lives or squander them, that would be an insult to those who have been tragically killed or may die in the future. The war is not here, and I pray that it never will be. Lebanon has too many problems to face as it is. It doesn't have a president, it doesn't have a working government, it remains in economic collapse, it lacks planning and infrastructure, it has 60% unemployment and 80% of people still living below the poverty level. It doesn't want war. Nobody here wants war. Oh, well, there are some, but not many. The vast majority of the population want to get on with their lives peacefully, bring up their children and families, and see them grow up, marry and have children of their own and be successful people, and maybe rescue their own country too. It can't cope with a war, and it has no appetite for it. And I hope in God's name that it doesn't come here. But I am much reassured by the conduct of the people I see around me and the way in which they carry out their everyday lives. It's actually very reassuring and thoroughly admirable. And the school survives, and it will go on surviving. Now, I was asked to, and this is not really a plug because I had no idea when I was asked to give this talk that the business of donations would come up, but I was asked for a link, and I've given that to Lois. But if you did want to make a donation to the school at the moment, I want to suggest to you an endowment fund that we've recently set up. It's called the I Serve Endowment Fund, I Serve being the school's motto. And the idea of this is to generate a large capital sum to invest so that the interest can be used to educate children in the future, in the long term. And I'm mentioning this now because I feel at a time where our security and future is threatened, it's a very good way of investing, knowing that your money will never be spent because it's only the interest on it that will be spent, and it will provide that liberation that education provides for all young people long into the future. And I think that's all I want to say, but I assumed that there would be people to ask questions, and I can see quite a number of people on my screen, so I guess that some of you may have questions to ask, and I'm very happy to answer them, and I shall do so as honestly as I can.
I have a million questions to ask, but everyone else should have a chance first. But the whole time you were talking, I'm looking at a map, and of course, the Gaza Strip is on the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And Lebanon is just north of, and you're right next to Syria.
Yeah.
You know, it's very interesting. And I'm wondering, has anyone from Gaza tried to get to Lebanon? I guess it's about 1,000 miles, but by boat. I mean, is that even possible?
It's not far. I mean, we're only about, where I am here, I guess, is about 100 miles from where the trouble is.
100 miles?
But okay, maybe a little more, 120, but it's not far. I've actually checked it on Google. Lebanon's a very small country, and Israel is also a small country,
Right.
and they're right next to each other.
Ah,
So, distances are nothing. But what I can assure you of is that if you were sitting where I am now, you would be totally unaware of anything except a calm, quiet Sunday evening with the stars in the sky and a little chill in the air and the owls hooting. I mean, but the distance is not far away. It's not far away at all. And yet it could be a million miles away.
so I was tenfold out. It's 100 miles. Okay, that's very interesting. So has there been anyone show up? Have there been any refugees show up in Beirut?
Yes, but internally. So, it is not safe to be within 20 miles, let's say, of the Israeli border at the moment. So, a lot of people in southern Lebanon have migrated from there, and there have been people killed there to Beirut and to areas like Brummana. I mean, I can tell you now that there is nowhere you can rent in Brummana now. Every single property is occupied. Um, People have let out their properties for people coming in. So there is that sense that the Lebanese themselves, or some of them, have had to move. And is there a sense of danger? Well, not really, unless you were foolish enough to go to the areas that are where artillery fire is being exchanged. It's relatively safe, but it's vulnerable because Lebanon is not in a position to defend itself. It doesn't have a military air force. I mean, if heaven forbid the Israelis decided that Hezbollah had done too much and they decided to bomb, well, there's not much that can be done about it. But as I say, people are very philosophical, and I don't think it's going to happen.
It's interesting because I'm British, and my father's brother told me about watching the Battle of Britain from Eastbourne, just looking up at this.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't worried about it at all. And then their cousin was in Italy and actually was killed there. So, but his diary was published, and he talked about with the British Army going through Rome and seeing all these flowers, seeing everyone working on the fields. I mean, this is the thing. War is really horrible if you're right there, but it's like we have this ability to go on, and that's what you've been describing.
Well, yes, because there is no option. It has to go on.
Right, absolutely.
And perhaps that's one of the things that surprised me because I come from a peaceful country, a stable country. I'm not used to this, and that's why I am slightly in awe of the people who live here and for whom it is their country. But I also feel for them because foreigners here have always got the option of getting out while there is a way out, and the Lebanese do not have that option. They have to put up with it and find a way of coping with it and managing it. It's hard for them.
I'm just wondering, what is the presence or view of people with respect to Hezbollah? Do they encounter these people all the time throughout Lebanon? Are they just at the border? I mean, what influence does Hezbollah have on your day-to-day life?
Well, it depends where you live. And you have to remember that Hezbollah in Lebanon is a political party and is part of government here. They control the finance and education ministries. Well, not Hezbollah, but the Shia Muslims do. And yes, it is an armed militia, but it is part of day-to-day life. And if you went through Lebanon, you would find there are lots of people who support them, and there are lots of people who definitely do not support them. This is a multi-racial, multicultural, multi-religious society divided into its own quarters. I think all that I can say at the moment, and I mean, Tony Manasseh could answer you better than I can. I don't know if he's left the meeting or not, but I would just say that there is a general feeling in the country that people don't want war. They're exhausted. I mean, there's so much has gone wrong in this country in the last 5 years. The last thing people need is destruction. They had it with the Beirut explosion in 2020, which displaced 300,000 people. They've been reduced to terrible poverty and humiliation by the economic collapse. They've no government to lead them. I mean, so this is just another thing that they don't need. Yes, and Hezbollah is not the way here that it is seen outside the country as a terrorist organization. This is part of the fabric of Lebanese life. They are, I mean, Nasrallah, their leader, is a political figure in Lebanon, and meets with all the other political figures to decide things. It's a very strange situation. You have a country where one of the political parties has a militia that's probably stronger than the Lebanese army. But life goes on, and the Lebanese are used to this kind of form of coexistence. Because if they don't coexist, then then you're talking about the civil war, which has never been declared finally over, although it is.
No, it's interesting. Since you last talked to us last year, I've followed what's happening in your school, because I hadn't known that there were 2 Quaker schools in the Middle East, and that was very interesting to me. And of course, the other one is Ramallah on the West Bank. And I just, I just think that both schools are incredibly important, and I'm really hoping that people will donate individually and through meetings and through yearly meetings. Edward Syed, who was a Palestinian, his wife was, I believe, she was from Brummana School. I know her parents were Quakers. So, and the lady who was the Hanan Ashwawi, who was the Hanan Ashwawi. Yeah, well, she came from Ramallah.
From Ramallah School.
So every time I hear of a peacemaker, in the Middle East, I find that there's a connection to one of these 2 schools, and that is absolutely thrilling to me. I just think it's tremendously important for British Quakers, American Quakers, everyone outside to do what we can to support these schools. And you're doing a great job by yourself. I mean, you now have a weekly newsletter that I get, which is, and you've got a very active YouTube channel. There's a lot of things going on, and I think it's fabulous what you're doing. We've not been able to get in touch with the principal of Ramallah School, and we want to. That was our first thought after October 7th, was to try and see what we could do to help.
Yeah.
But what they did was, they closed the school on October 19th.
Yeah.
Now it's all remote, and I understand there's very little access to the internet in the West Bank. Now, of course, the West Bank is not Gaza, but they're having all kinds of problems too. So I just think it's great what you're doing.
I think it's very kind of you to say so. But what we're doing is just normality, really. But we are aware of its significance. And sorry, Tony.
All right.
But we're aware of its significance, and I think that the most important thing I can do, because I'm often disappointed, because we haven't achieved this or we haven't achieved that, but then people will say to me, well, hang on a minute, you're living in extraordinary circumstances, all kinds of things have happened. And so my job in a way is to keep the school going, to keep it working as normally and as successfully as possible, and to provide that environment of calm and continuity that it requires. And all right, yeah, the exam results might not be as good this year as last year or whatever, but everything is relative. The important thing is that the children are there at the school being educated, being enlightened, and learning important values that will carry them through life, just as you said, Susanna. And I think that matters. So again, compared with the West, education has different measures. It has different value from what it does in the West. I mean, I suppose that the value is the same all over the world, except it's kind of graded. It depends where you are and depends on the circumstances. But yes, I think a cool head and keeping calm are very, very important in these circumstances. Because one thing I did see the last few weeks was people's inclination to panic. And that's a very frightening thing, because it's fear. It's all kinds of irrational things happen then. And that's what the school doesn't need. The school must always be that haven of calm and continuity where children can learn and parents can also be reassured. And that way life can carry on pretty well normally. I mean, you've no idea the pressures there are when something like this happens in Lebanon for things to stop, for inertia to take over, for people to drop their plans, for people to say, oh, another time, now's not the time. And my job is to keep things going and say, no, we carry on, keep our eye on the horizon. Never mind the kind of all the rough storms happening around us, they will pass. All things will pass. We must keep our eye on the horizon, the destination we're going to, and we'll get there. As soon as we get distracted or deflected by the troubles going on around us, we're lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't always feel quite as philosophical and calm about this as I was saying now, by the way. I do have my moments of terror, but I'm human, But at least to the parents and the children and so on, I have to be that calm figure. That's what they need from me.
Do you have daily meeting for worship with the students?
No, we don't actually, and that's a very good question. Although Brummana is a Quaker school and we have Quakerly values, Lebanon is a deeply divided country, and the Civil War was all about those deep religious and social divisions. And therefore, we don't practice religion at school. We do have, when we have assemblies, we always have a minute's silence in the meeting house, sometimes 2 minutes silence, in respect of Quaker custom and tradition. And we do articulate and practice the Quaker values in all kinds of ways. The botanical garden is an example of that, actually. Stewardship of our world and love of our environment. But we don't teach religion and we don't teach politics. And the result of that is that we are able to welcome in people of all faiths and of none. And it's one of the very few schools in Lebanon that's able to do that. And so if you talk to children here, they'll talk about free speech and we're allowed to think what we like here and say what we think, providing, of course, they respect other people's views. Now, children are children. They fall out about all kinds of things. But in my time here, I have never heard them fall out about religion. I've never seen issues to do with Shia or Sunni Muslims or Muslims and Christians or anything like that at all. They fall out about everything else. But I mean, that's the nature of young people growing up. They're working out, what they can say and what they can't, but not about religion. And I think that's an important feature of the school, actually. And it's one of the reasons why the school has turned out diplomats and politicians who are able to bring people together, because they grow up living with people from different backgrounds that they would not be afforded in other kinds of schools.
Yeah. Right. So, but if someone wants to have meaningful worship, I mean, is that
yes,
possible? But that's separate.
It would be outside school, and in fact, the meeting, there is a meeting room in the administration building of the school, in which old scholars, I mean, Tony Manasseh is one of them, when he's in Lebanon, would come and meet on a Sunday for Sunday meeting. And when Quakers come over from the UK or anywhere else, they can go to the meeting on Sunday. And indeed, students at the school could also go if they chose to. It's up to them, really. But it's not something that, it's just too risky.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, now, one thing I will say, I taught a book, because I still teach at the school. We are short of English teachers. So I teach at a fairly high level, at IGCSE level, which is a British qualification. And I was teaching a book called Life of Pi last year. You may have seen the film or even read the book, which is all about survival and about religious belief and the existence of a universal God. Now, I had a smallish class of 12 or so, and they loved that book. They thought it was wonderful. They would have talked about it all day long, because it allowed them, through the medium of the book, to talk about their religious beliefs. And that happened, and because it was through the book, it happened in a very civilized way. And I had a great mixture in those 12, but half of them were Christians, and the other half were a mixture of Sunni and Shia Muslims. And it was fascinating to hear them talk, and to hear them talk about, you know, if there's a God, what God is, if there can be a universal God that crosses from Hinduism to Judaism to Christianity to Islam. And they were very keen to talk about these matters because they interested them. They wanted to know what the meaning of life was. And so to teach, in a way, religion through a book, a novel like that, worked very well. And it did not lead to any antagonism, because they were always having to bring it back to what the situation was in the novel and how the main protagonist survived and why he thought that there was a universal God protecting him. And it was very interesting, actually.
Wow. Can Tony say something about being a former student? I mean, this is great that you've got a former student here. Is he still there?
You're muted, Tony.
Well, actually, I was there for a very short while as a student, but let me touch a bit on some of the things that David said. Well, actually, Brummana High School and Ramallah School, when they were started back in the 1800s, late 1800s, it was a very global Quaker approach to the Middle East. So we had, like in Lebanon, we had an orphanage, we had several satellite schools, and we had a mental asylum, later on a TB sanatorium. All those were really Quaker endeavors. And with the days and with the troubles in the area, these started closing down. And what remains right now is Brummana High School and the Ramallah School. And as David said, and he said it so well, is that these two schools have taught so many Arab leaders, and they've made out of them, they've made thinkers out of them, rather than taking sides and think. On the contrary, they were bringing cultures together. They were better communicators with the West because they were educated at these schools, who believed in openness, who believed in intercultural exchange. You see, so take, for example, ministers in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia, or they all went to Brummana High School. A lot of them went to Brummana High School. And these are the leaders now. So these are the ones who are able to communicate with the West, better communicate with the West, rather than people who are ardent, who are very closed in, who are very fanatical. Anybody who's been to our schools came out to be more open, ready to exchange ideas, ready to seek peace. So, you see, I find that these two schools are really essential to the Middle East, especially at this time of very strong conflict. And the conflict today at the Middle East has reached a point where I think of no return. I mean, here I may differ a little with David in that the Middle East is heading towards what could be catastrophic. And what we've seen so far is only the beginning. I'm sorry to differ about that, David, but it can really get dangerous. And these coming few days or week or so may be an indication of what's to come. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any present higher education in Lebanon?
Yes.
Yes.
And years ago, I had a colleague who had taught at the American University. And that in the old days, that was a very fine school. I don't even know whether it's still operational.
It is. I mean, there are lots of universities in Lebanon. AUB, I think, is the one you're referring to, American University of Beirut.
Yes.
Of which Tony, I think, is a graduate. LAU, the Lebanese American University, the Notre Dame University. There are dozens of universities here, and they are very good, most of them.
Wonderful.
And AUB has the reputation of being the best university in the Middle East. But
yes,
not everybody agrees with that, but that's its reputation.
Yeah. My friend Raoul Bertrand was a professor of classics in the university, the American University.
Which year was that? Which year was he there?
Well, it was way back in the probably the 1960s.
Oh. Well, I went in 69 and graduated in 75.
Yeah, before that.
Yeah. You see, AUB
That's
was
good to know.
Presbyterian.
That's good to know. I'm glad that the answer to that question, that there is plenty of higher education. Again, it's a myth that we think that there is no left more higher education, but that's wrong.
Yeah,
we're wrong.
I think there's a tendency in the West, because things blow up and so on, to kind of see the Middle East in a homogenous way, where it's really quite heterogeneous, and Lebanon is different from all the other countries around it. Really, it's in living here, I kind of find it a peculiar mixture of Europe. It's very Europeanized in many ways, and Americanized as well. And yet there's an aspect of it which is also very Arabic, and like its neighbors, like Syria, but it's unique. And education has always been important here, it proliferates with schools and universities. People realize in a fragile place like this how important it is. It's a kind of portable passport to success in life, that if you're educated, you're civilized, but you're successful too. And people value it very highly. I mean, it's interesting that of those 31 families that left the school a few weeks ago, 28 have come back. Education is just too important to be missing out on. And if they think that, Armageddon is 5 minutes away rather than 30 seconds away, they'll come back for it. And therefore it is much more highly valued, in my experience, than in other countries I've lived in, including my own. Indeed, in England, it's regarded as something of a luxury, really.
Yeah. Well, my friend thought that Beirut in the 1960s was an ideal place to live, one of the best cities to live in the world. And, you know, he was a highly educated man, and he was very happy for his 15 years teaching there and living there in Beirut.
You see, Beirut was the center of education, of healthcare, of a banking center, a hub. And, you know, even now with all of the misery around, it's still to a certain extent a refuge for many neighboring Arab states to come and seek education in Lebanon or medical treatments. Of course, our banks are shut and the money is gone. But, you know, Lebanon has survived World War I, World War II, several interreligious conflicts, you know, the 1948 exodus of Palestinians out of Palestine, Israel at that time. So Lebanon is a melting pot of all these cultures and events. And it's where Europe met the Middle East. That's the asset that Lebanon gathered over the years.
I mean, it's probably fair to say as well, I was going to mention this earlier, that there are, of course, many Palestinians in Lebanon, thousands of Palestinian refugees. And we have a small number of Palestinians at the school as well, because they spilled over, as Tony said, after the Nakba in 1948 into Lebanon. And indeed were here in large numbers, I think, immediately before the Civil War too. So yeah, I mean, it is a great mixture of peoples, but this constant moving in and out does unsettle people. And certainly recently, in the last couple of months, there's been a lot of movement of people in the country. And I mean, that would unsettle people in any country in the world, but particularly perhaps here because it's very fluid.
Wow. And Syrian refugees too.
Yeah, there are over 1 million Syrian refugees in the country, which is about getting on for 20 to 30% of the population. But there are a lot more have come in recently for various reasons. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's not a lot of love lost between the Syrians and the Lebanese. You know, the Syrians too have attacked Lebanon, I think, in the 1990s. And I have certainly occasionally had problems at school. We have lots of Syrians at school, sorting out differences. Now, these are not religious differences, these are national differences between Syrian and Lebanese children because of the kind of prejudices they bring from their homes. So yeah, that's not an easy one at all. And I could talk to you a great deal more about this, but I'm not going to.
You really have taken on quite a job. It sounds to me like you have to be an economist, you have to be a general. I mean, when you're sorting things out, as well as teaching and running the school together. I imagine you have a lot more things you have to do.
Yes, I have
as
to be
a principal here than you were in Britain. Yes.
Yeah, that's very true. I have to be much more hands-on, but that's simply because of the circumstances, and that the country has lost 7,200 teachers in the last 3 years, and it's very hard to employ people and appoint people. And yes, I do have to get involved in a lot. I mean, in many ways, it's the hardest job I've ever done in my life, but it's also the most rewarding, and I have learned a huge amount about education, schools, people, sensibilities, all kinds of things, really. I had no idea really when I came here what I was letting myself in for. But then that's just as well, because I probably wouldn't have come. But once I had come, I realized that actually what I was doing was very valuable and that I had years and years of experience that I could pass to other people and help them. And sometimes I feel actually quite hopeless and helpless because I feel I'm not doing enough. But I suppose on balance, I am making a contribution that I feel is valuable. I didn't feel that it wasn't valuable what I did in my own country, but it's on a different scale here. And yes, I mean, I've learned more in the last 5 years than I learned in the previous 20, without any question.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. Gosh.
Question. It was spoken, it was just spoken of leaders, of people who are coming out of Quaker schools that are becoming leaders and who are able to have strong intercultural dialogue. How does the Quaker, if you could clarify, how does the school, how does the Quaker spirituality and the values process the different, not religious values and opinions, but the political? It's going to be, to some extent, a hotbed of political views that have to come in with the students and parents. Are there intercultural or even political ways to that the school processes these differences of ideas, which have to exist? How does it deal with that?
Okay, well, I think I'll answer that in several ways. First of all, as I said at the start, we don't teach religion and we don't teach politics. So at least officially, we don't discuss these matters, although they will come up in class through texts that we teach or material that we teach in subjects like economics or business studies or English literature. They will arise. And there is then open discussion. And the important thing here is that we don't take sides, that we have objective discussions, and we can do so because it's always through a third party. In other words, the material we're studying. So people they may be expressing their own views, but they're expressing their views through an economic theory or through Life of Pi or whatever it happens to be. And that provides a kind of parameters for discussion, which are seen to be of an intellectual nature and protected by the parameters of critical analysis that one would be carrying out through studying the subject. But I think there are other ways that this is confronted as well. And the most important way is through our biggest extracurricular activity, which is the Model United Nations Programme. Now, the Model United Nations Programme is an organization which effectively creates in schools a setup like the UN in which global matters are debated, discussed, argued over in a manner through which, by peaceful means, resolution is reached. The trainers are teachers, but the people who manage and direct the MUN program are senior students. And they engage in debates and conferences, as they're called, throughout the school year in different places, sometimes at universities, sometimes at schools. We here this year had our 150th anniversary Model United Nations Conference. And we had about 200 delegates at it. And we had 2 schools from other countries, one from Oman, an international school, and one from England, a Quaker school in England. And they took part, and they came and stayed for a week, and they took part in the 3-day conference along with all the Lebanese schools. And of course, the thing about the conference is that it's not straightforward debating, because each delegate is allocated a country to represent. So, for example, you could end up with someone from Brummana High School having to represent Gaza, or having to represent Israel, or having to represent South Africa, or China, or the USA. And what they have to do, because they know what the topics for debate will be in advance, let's say, for example, carbon neutral world, they have to debate these topics from the point of view of the country they're representing. So in advance, they carry out a great deal of research. And then on the day of the conference, they have to pretend that they're from Iceland or wherever it happens to be. And in this way, they get under the skin of other cultures because they have to actively empathize with those cultures in order to present as strongly as they can their point of view on any given topic, whatever it is. Now, we have about 200 upper school children out of 500 actively involved in the Model United Nations programme. And from this, they learn to understand how people in other countries think, what their views are according to their cultures and their geopolitical stances, etc. And they meet and they will be trained and debate topics throughout the year. They'll meet 2 or 3 times a week, often late into the evenings, in preparation for the debates which happen at the weekends. So I think that this, and we pride ourselves on MUN, we're one of the best, if not the top school in the country in this particular field. And I think the fact that we are an open-minded establishment in terms of the Quaker principles of equality, freedom, respect, tolerance, peaceful resolution is one of the reasons why. And the fact, of course, that we have people from all backgrounds here.
That's fascinating. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our politicians participated in this program and learned to speak for other countries?
Yes, that would be great. Can you imagine the United Nations in New York working like that?
Thank you. Thank you.
Not at all.
Fascinating.
Anyone else going to speak? Ask a question?
David, I'm wondering if you could tell us the favorite thing that you've learned in your 5 years in Lebanon.
Beautiful.
I think the thing that I've learned probably more than anything else is not to be judgmental.
Very good. Yeah.
When I came here, I thought I knew it all. I had run very successful schools in the UK. I'd been a school principal for 26 years. I had a very successful career. And what I learned here was that I could not impose my opinions or my prejudices or my premature judgments on other people, because I was in a very different world altogether. And you never knew who you were talking to or what they'd experienced. And I went through a kind of process where I had to strip back all my understanding and look at people on the level again and not blame people, not judge them. Many of the people I met had gone through experiences I couldn't even imagine. And therefore, there were always reasons why people did what they did. And although I might not agree with them, one had to empathize.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Unless there are more questions, I'd like to end the recording. So if you have a question, please do so now.
And if you think of a question later, please feel free to email me. My email address is david.gray, Gray, at bhs.edu.lb.
Thank you.